What's going on, beautiful J4 community and family? Thank you guys for joining me for another edition of J4 Conversations. I typically like to do a show midweek and then also on Sunday, running a little bit later than usual. I had a fortunate opportunity today to do a collaboration with a gentleman named Mulatto Vanguard, where we talked about a previous video that I did on various criterion the biracial community was seeking to become its own independent identity, all of which the subject matter just fascinates me. And so I still wanted to get on this evening to continue the dialogue. But first, I want to say thank you. I want to say thank you to everyone who has been watching a particular video called White Mothers and Their Black Biracial Sons. For some reason, this thing just sort of caught the algorithm. And in the last several days, we've had over 20,000 views of it, quite a few subscriptions, and also, interestingly, quite a bit of comments and commentary. It seems like the biracial conversation is one that is sort of a current event, a lot going on in the world, and I'm discovering a lot. I'm learning a lot. Despite being racially a biracial kid, born to a Creole African American father, also a white European mother, born in 1968, I culturally kind of came of age in the black space, but I'm discovering that times have changed. Times have changed apparently. Within the comment section, I'm discovering that some black folks think biracial people aren't black. That was new to me, perhaps a part of my naivete. But then I also discovered that some biracial folks agreed with them. And this has just been tremendously fascinating to me to see how culture, identity formation has shifted recently over the past several decades or so. But it shouldn't have been surprising as I sort of sit back and look at changing demographics, the immersion of new technologies that allow people to speak in ways and capacities that previously were never even thought of. That naturally, more and more people are going to be coming to the table with their ideals, with their stories, with their communal gains, but also some of their communal losses. And so today, I just want to sort of stay in the space of this conversation around biracial identity. And I've titled this one White Mothers, Black Fathers, so interracial marriages, and biracial communalism. Biracial communalism. I must admit right up front that when I was 18, sort of starting college, and I made a conscious choice that I was going to get out of the biracial proverbial gray, that I was going to choose to land within a cultural space, particularly a black space, which then shaped decisions I made with intentionality to sort of gain an experience and an entry into blackness. One of the things that attracted me was the communal nature of blackness, the connection to history, the sense of pride and ownership and achievement and resiliency. And so I wanted to sort of experience or explore this component that if a biracial child were to do what I'm hearing repeatedly in the messages within the comments, that a biracial child ought to love both love sources, certainly agree with that, but they also ought to learn the experience, the heritage, the history of both love sources. And as they then go out in the world, they'll do that with sort of equal footing in a black and in a white world, assuming the biracial composition is black and white. That makes perfect sense. Sounds completely logical. Because one thing interracial couples ought to understand, and when they think about, particularly in terms of child rearing, is that you are producing a child that will not have the same racial composite as you. Hey, Dr. Wynn, how are you? Our number one ambassador in the house. So good to see you as always. Handsome picture you sent me. Really dug your son's afro. But interracial couples, y'all must at some point grapple with the reality that you'll produce another human life that does not have the racial heritage configuration that you have. And although it may change kind of going down the road, but culture and identity are very dominant themes in terms of identity evolution for young people today. It's important for them about how they fit into groups, how they gain membership into certain cultural communities, how they expand social circles, because all of this is how they gain a sense of themselves, how they gain a sense of how they fare and rate among their peers and their age sets. And for all human beings, regardless of race, background, or culture, need to go through stages of belonging, right? And so for biracial children, this is critically important. And so, mom and dad, you grew up in a monolithic experience, assuming you're monolithically black, monolithically white. You grew up in that kind of worldview, yet you've chosen to join together, beautifully so, and you're producing a child who, in essence, has the duality of the love sources, but they don't have example on how to navigate from a biracial space through society, through community, through social circles. And as parents, of course, it is our first responsibility to position them as solidly as possible so that they navigate peer groups, age sets, and the nuance related to coming into young adulthood. And so, how do you do that, right? How do you do that? Well, the commentary that I certainly agree with is teaching the beautiful seeds the cultural nuance or the life lived or the realities of both cultures. Okay. This is critically important because the biracial question is here. It's not going anywhere. In fact, one would suggest that more and more interracial marriages are going to produce more and more biracial babies. Interracial marriages in 1967 was at 3%. Okay, 3%. The society had an approval rate in 1968 of 20% for interracial marriages. You fast forward to today, it's upwards of 94%. The value system of America, the race nuance of America, although it seems tumultuous and contentious in certain kind of times, particularly pivoting off national incidents involving police. But generally speaking, the sentiment among the populace around interracial marriage is largely in support of 94% today. So 3% of interracial marriages in 1967. You fast forward to 2015, the latest data set I saw, and it was 17%. 17% of newlyweds are interracial. We would also anticipate that that trajectory would continue to grow. They're producing children. 1% of biracial people in 1970, the last data set I saw, that was around my era, my age set, to where it is upwards of 10% today, or to translate numerically, in terms of raw numbers, that's 33.8 million people, young babies, are identifying as two or more races. And so the population and the presence of biracial kids is going to increase. And it seems at a current moment, and perhaps I'm maybe my social media is biasing me, but I'm seeing a lot of sentiment from Black monolithic communities that biracial people are not Black. There's a little heat in that conversation. But then I'm also hearing from biracial communities a declaration for their own identity. And when you have the historical cultural mother in Blackness that is sending certain messages largely from youthful voices about membership status, and then is causing some sort of reaction from the biracial communities, and they're declaring a call for their own identity independent of Blackness, then you have something there to sort of contend with. Imagine Mulata, how are you? Hope you're doing very well today on a Sunday. So, but underscoring all of this, how you doing, Abby? Underscoring all of this is a question that must be contended with, whether you want to grapple with it or not. But in my generation, we tended to silence our white mothers publicly. We certainly had love for them; they had love for us. But in public spaces, we tended to lean heavily and outwardly in our rhetoric and our conversation, aligned with our Black fathers, right? That was consistent with the time. It was a different time culturally in terms of priorities. There was a lot of discussion on what is Blackness and how are you relevant to it. And there was space for biracial kids to be a part of that. At least I certainly felt that. But the scoring question about how do you legitimately represent both love sources? To me, that is a very timely question, perhaps a question that is long overdue. And the biracial kid is the living manifestation of two parental love sources from two cultural or racial different kind of communities. And biracial children, whether they lean Black or they lean biracial or they lean something else, ought to have a way to represent outwardly the love that they have inwardly with their beautiful family network and the maternal and parental figure, but also the extended nuclear families of different kinds of groups. And so this question is a very legitimate one, and it is one that biracial kids may grapple with at certain times, especially when they're navigating youthful peer nuance. But I would believe, assuming healthy relationship to both parents, they would want to do that. Okay, they would want to do that. So in a very sort of open kind of conversation kind of way, I just want to walk this down the line a little bit to see if biracial folks do declare and have more of an affirmation and a standing in a biracial identity that ought not to create an adversarial relationship with blackness or whiteness, but is just a new articulation of who they are. If they assert themselves more from a biracial identity, will they remain communal or collectivist or shift to individualistic mindsets? Okay, let me pause there. Abby says, it's magic. Okay, they're shouting out each other. Beautiful. I'm one of the rare ones with a black mom. A lot of, I think it's horrible how biracial people with white mothers get so much hate. It's ridiculous, and I don't like that. Okay, so yes, I'm using white mothers and black fathers, which tends to be the typical marital pattern between black and white, but essentially I'm speaking from the dynamic of interracial communities. All right. So if biracial children assert more of a biracial identity, will they remain communal, collectivist, or shift to an individualistic mindset? Okay. So both collectivist and individualistic cultures are concerned with how individuals in a society prioritize and manage their relationship goals. Both sort of represent that. Collectivist culture prioritizes solidarity over individual goals, while individualistic culture focuses on human independence. Okay, human independence. Collectivist or communal cultures focus in on group solidarity and prioritize that over individual goals, and individualistic cultures focuses primarily on human independence and or personal freedoms. Okay, and or personal freedoms. So let's look at communalism, and I'm going to make some generalizations here. There's obviously example where this is not the case, but generally speaking, black folks for historical reason tend to lean communal, where they put a high premium on community, they put a high premium on communalism, and it has been a way of strategizing, a way of resistance, a way of navigating historical threat from white entity sources, from chattel enslavement, Reconstruction, Jim Crow, to where you had to be always mindful of where you lived, where you were, what was your proximity to whiteness, was there potential for hostility, for violence, so you always had to manage that at a time where there were sort of discriminatory practices that were legal and could be visited upon black bodies without any predictability, and varying levels of vehemency, from indignities to disrespect to dehumanization to death and murder. All right. If that has been your relationship to a predominant society, you tend to have to bond together to form a cultural glue. And out of that comes a sort of communal mindset and orientation to the world. Since 1965 legislation, I think that glue is increasingly rearranging itself. The kind of intensity that brought black people together for growth, for praise, for joy, for laughter, for family, for community, that is sort of structurally redefining itself, in large part because there's been success in what the ancestors and elders did in the terms of race, human dignity, and civil rights. But communalism generally identifies with the group. They tend to find pride in its gains. There's times where you're watching a game and you see someone, a black experienced African American, whatever the case may be, and inherently you cheer for them. You don't know them, they're not your family, but there's, that's one of the quirky nuances of communalism, where you just find pride in your culture's gains, right? And then simultaneously, you also find grief in its losses. You find grief in its losses as well. So communalism has moments of collective pride, collectivist pride, but it also has moments of collectivist grief, right? To where you inherit grief when you see something happen in your community that's negative. There's some dynamics with that you have to inherit that stress, where it might not personally happen to you or a personal loved one, but because of a communal relationship born out of centuries of navigating the contemporary space, you then sort of take on that luggage, that stress as well. And so there's nuance there. You also have a we orientation to the world, because you've experienced codependency, you've experienced group solidarity, you understand the dynamic of we, and you have a we orientation to the world. Your value formation comes from parents, comes from belief systems, could be religious, and it also comes from the group. You pick up subtle nuances, subtle messages, subtle ways of being, subtle ways of thinking. You pick that up from the group as well. And there's good in that dynamic, and there's also problems in that dynamic. And then also history for communal orientation is always present. History is always present, and the people tend to see things in patterns. When they look out at the society, an individualistic orientation sees incidents, but a communal mindset sees patterns. All right. Let me pause there, see what we got in the chat box. I start with the closet and work my way out. Okay, I don't know if there's chat talk or something here. Let me see. All right. As a Black community, we are nowhere near dealing with white people on the same level and issues as in the past. Yeah, that's if I'm reading that correctly from Abby NYC, the glue of yesterday is not the same glue of today because the context of history has rearranged itself in positive and problematic ways in a modern time. All right. Most of us have been pro-black for so long, we not want to be us and our sources. We now want to be us and our sources. Okay, so these are biracial voices, voices that I'm discovering, beautiful human beings, but they are basically coming out of the shadows or the proverbial shadows. Now, again, my own naivete, they may have been around a long time, but it wasn't until that video, White Mothers and Their Black Biracial Sons, that I discovered this whole new way of thinking, both from Black community, of which I consider a cultural home, but also the biracial community. And it's been fascinating. It's been fascinating. I don't like to see the infighting that's going on, but this identity assertion is very fascinating to me. I feel like I'm observing sort of an anthropological birthing of something new in the modern era. So it's fascinating. So I'm exploring if this were to walk itself down the road, how does this then impact a biracial child who is legitimately, outwardly trying to represent both the beauties of their heritage and culture, to where in my day, we didn't have that dynamic because we tended to lean into just one community, or at least my sphere. And I grew up primarily in a military environment on the West Coast. So I'm imagining the South had different kinds of experiences, perhaps more evident biracial people in more numerical ways than what I was accustomed to. All right. All right. Okay. So communalism, we kind of went over that. Identify with group, associate pride with it, associate sorrow and loss and grief when that is the case. Have a we orientation to the world. Values come from parents, of course, belief systems, but also influenced by the group. History is always present and tends to see things in the broader society as patterns. All right. An individualistic mindset does not sort of begin itself at a racial cultural group. They don't tend to galvanize or think or see themselves from a racial kind of group, in part because of de facto definition, right? Historically, at the onset of the country, if anything negative got dumped onto other minority cultural groups, the de facto identity was all that was beautiful, privileged, and beneficial, right? Also, the numerical representation of whiteness in the United States of America is just too large to have to be able to create any kind of synergy or boundaries that can be sort of manifested to create even anything inkling of a racialized kind of cultural group. So there's no real cultural community. They tend to identify sort of regionally, tend to identify around religion, tend to identify around things of more of a subset kind of nature, and they will obviously galvanize around nationality type things. They also have an I orientation to the world, which is a different way of centering oneself than the we orientation to the world. And history is not present as it is in communal groups, right? There's not as much referencing in terms of cause and effect. The past having momentum and presence in the future. In white circles or individualistic circles, history is this sort of academic. And then finally, as I talked about, things are seen as incidents. So, very much of the police shootings that we've seen over the past decade or so, it causes this swell and this uproar rightfully so in some instances, from a Black community because they see things as patterns. If you look at sort of individualistic society, they see things as incidents and they don't connect them, and therefore the momentum is not stacked upon and stacked upon and stacked upon. They look at every case as an individual occurrence and they examine it upon those lines. There's one ought to do that to focus it on its in its individual level, but they then don't connect it to patterns. So a communal mindset sees patterns, individualistic mindset sees incidents. All right. So the question I want to throw out there today, see if anyone wants to come on and chop it with me. If biracial children are not Black, but yet they are defining as representing both love sources, both Black and white, will they become communal or individualistic, or some combination of the two? If someone out there is biracial, I see some folks in here. How did you navigate that? Or is it something where you're taking the best of both worlds, right? And I personally see tremendous value in communalism. I think each generation is sort of navigating that, pushing group think, pushing group expectations, pushing common group definitions. I think the very fact that the question of biracial identity is as such that it is sort of an example of a much more different kind of dialogue manifested in the current time. So questions: if biracial children are not Black, will they become communal or individualistic? All right, let me get the invite. Copy to the clipboard. All right, we are supporting the people that feel we are a replacement for Black. We want to be recognized for our multi-race and culture and not replaced anymore. Okay. Oh, okay. Sick of the ignorant fear that people are scared we're trying to replace them on both sides. We definitely are not. Okay. And then Abby NYC, the best of both worlds since birth. My parents kept me exposed. So Abby, did you take on a communal nature and an individualistic nature, or had you even thought about it? I hadn't really thought about it until today. All right. So I put the link in the chat. I'll keep it open for a couple of minutes if anyone wants to come up. But I'm definitely interested in your thoughts. From what I'm seeing a sense of communalism in the biracial community. There's a sense of gathering in terms of space, and I think that's sort of cathartic and fulfilling, where you can share stories and see things or patterns across the experiences that folks are having with similar racial kind of configuration. All right, Magic Mulatto, how are you? Can you hear me? Magic
Hi, can you
Mulatto,
hear
how are
me?
you? I can hear you now. How are
Hi.
you?
Hello. How are you doing today?
I'm doing
I'm
very
wonderful.
well.
Thank you for asking.
Yeah, I'm doing very well. Just chopping on a Sunday. Just trying to get my
Cool.
54-year-old mind around this new conversation, this new assertion. When I was
Mhm.
coming of age, I didn't really think of a biracial autonomous identity. I just kind of
Mhm.
pathway to Black, and I had a lot of encouragement and support from my own love source, and so the biracial dynamic was not one that I thought about and didn't discover until the recent video. So what do you
Right.
think?
Yeah. It's definitely something that we are pioneering in this modern age, but it's definitely not new. But it's something we're trying to rediscover and rediscover our history because, like Abby told me, it's buried in Black history. It's like people say we don't have a culture, we don't have an identity because it's so buried. And even though if we're not Black, then we have to take back our history. We got to say, okay, well, this is mixed history right here. These were mixed people. These were people who, share genetic composure that we have. So that's what we're trying to do. We're trying to reclaim our history, reclaim our people. That like Maggie Lena Walker, like I discovered, she was the first woman in the whole world to have a bank. She was a biracial woman. So,
Mhm.
that's part of our history and our heritage. And, so I think such a great question. The communal versus individualism. I think it's always about balance. You
Mhm.
need to have like some sort of sense of community so you could share ideas and share perspectives and share experiences with people who could relate to you, right? But
Right.
at the same time, most of us don't live like unless you live in like New York or Hawaii with a large like biracial population, you could have that sense of community. But most of us don't. Like I live in Washington State. It's not that many biracial people around me or anything. So I have to have like an individualistic. Sorry, I can't talk. I gotta have like kind of I'm on my own, but at the same time, I love and respect all people of all races. I could be friends and have fun and be anywhere. Like that's part of
Mm-hmm.
the beauty of being biracial. You can kind of adapt to any environment, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I think it's a balance of both. It's like knowing your identity, being proud of who you are, not trying to be something you're not,
Right.
and also at the same time just walking in the world, proudly, giving everybody respect, representing yourself well, representing your community well, and having a sense of pride
Yeah.
in who you are. That's all it's about, right?
Yeah. As more and more people intermarry and have biracial children, and especially if there's more of an acceptance, because I imagine white moms may have felt some pressure to raise their children with a black leaning. I think that was probably the prevailing rhetoric and direction, at least maybe 10 years ago. But now, if there's this opening up to sort of to just openly, without pushback or contention, to raise them biracially, which is to say, to manifest and represent both love sources, that there would be this taking that up. They would take that up, right? But I'm wondering, does that then produce a different kind of way of being in the world for the biracial child who has both both a communal both a communal influence and an individualistic kind of influence? So I wonder how they'll manage that. But in your estimate, they should try to represent both in balance. Okay, beautiful. Abby, how are you?
Hello, Jay. Can you hear me?
I can hear you. Yes.
Oh, great. Well,
No,
I'm
I
happy to meet somebody.
I can hear you very very loudly, Abby. You're loud.
Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't realize that. I have these gamer headphones that I got from my neighbor's kid. I'm like,
Okay.
wow, I feel like I'm in a spaceship. So excuse me. Um, yeah, that's another thing. And I'm always trying to get my tech right. But it's nice to meet somebody my own age. So you've kind of
Okay.
entered a realm of somebody too that's found their tribe,
Okay.
with their vibe here on this machine. Now, see, they don't know what life was like before this.
Right.
I do, and you do. And I think that the experiences with us in our age, I do think there were different experiences with men and women in
Hmm.
having to be raised in black culture, so to speak, and the unique dynamics and challenges that men are going to face that women may not face, and the differences. So,
True.
as
True.
our mothers, as my mother being white, is experiencing some of the experiences I'm experiencing by being a biracial child and a woman.
Okay.
So there are going to be some, whereas my brother, on the other hand, has another conversation that needs to be had with him
Hmm.
about his biracial status. And also, there was something of a different dynamic from the two of us as well. My name doesn't look black on anything you write down, but my brother has an
Ah.
Afrocentric name.
Ah.
So that
Okay.
was also another sort of thing where I was raised in an Afrocentric way, so to speak,
Hmm.
because both my family, my mom's Sicilian and my father's black, were kind of the outsiders anyway
Okay.
in their own culture within the American structure.
Hmm.
So it was kind of easy to gravitate. And I grew up around a lot of other mixed kids and sort of the outsiders. I grew up on the Lower East Side in the village.
Okay.
So it's either mixed, the outsiders, a lot of things that people nowadays are just now starting to accept and see that growing up in the 60s and 70s was everywhere around me. So I'm
Okay.
not shocked by anything. Like, I'm not shocked by biracial people. I'm not shocked by white people that are not racist. That's
Hmm.
another thing, the kind of
Hmm.
ally thing. I'm not,
Hmm.
those people don't shock me.
Hmm.
Gay people don't shock me. Cross-dressing people don't shock me.
Yeah, you said
Trans
it
people
all.
don't shock me. Nobody shocks me.
Right.
Drug
Right.
addicts don't shock me. Nobody shocks me. And I think that I feel for the people that didn't have this experience, and the more I'm in these spaces on this machine, meeting people so far away, I realized that I had that far away within blocks of me. I've
Yeah.
had, because I live in a city that people come from other places wanting to get away from their norm and their confines and that whatever hokey doke they got going on here and want a little taste of. And then if you're the outsider, where are you going to gravitate? To where all the other weird people are.
Yeah.
And so you kind of get those Midwestern people that come here that are biracial couples that don't want to be in that energy and they move to New York. So being in that area of New York too, and being in a place where you're in a 10-block radius from Chinatown to Little Italy, where my grandparents and my family was, to Orchard Street, where the Hasidim are. You all go to school together as children because you're all in the same district.
Yeah.
So there is that thing again. All your friends are. So you're mixing with their cultures. You go into sleepovers at people's house that have 2 refrigerators and you think they got more food than you and they're just as poor as you. So you're learning these little nuances that I know if I lived anywhere else in the world, I may not have learned. So I have such a unique, and I'm so thankful for everything I have, that I was able to be biracial and proud from the minute I was born.
Okay.
But when I found myself in all black spaces or all white spaces, that's when it got a little bit weird, because people constantly coming at you with, well, what are you and what do you identify? Well, what do I look like and what do I look like? I look Hispanic. I got a Jewish girl name. You know what I'm saying? What do you want? You know what I'm saying? What do you? You're gonna see a piece of paper and say, what's gonna walk in this door is not. I love the shocked look on people's face when they're like, oh, your name is Abby? Yeah. You know, so that's another kind of thing that I think that in my life I've had to deal with a lot of those different facets. So when I see these younger people, and I'm so proud of them, I've been fighting this battle. I take a very exposed, I will not allow myself to be, but now, my parents always encouraged education. And where there's knowledge, there's power, and knowledge itself comes first. So yes, know everything you need to know about your Black history, know everything you need to know about your Italian culture, and everywhere you go in the family, you will be around Italian people, Black people, we will all be together. And that's why. The education was always pushed. I worked in Harlem when I was a teenager, in the Schomburg Center, so there was Black history everywhere I looked. So I didn't have to worry. I had it there. And I had my Italian family that made sure I always knew what was going on there. So that was never an issue. As long as I was educated, I felt shielded.
Abby, let me
jump in. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say, you know, this is a parent-oriented channel. I've been leaning in the interracial space here recently, but I like your suggestion there for parents of biracial folks. You all have to be intentional in teaching your children about mama's culture, about daddy's culture. That actually will build a sense of affinity for culture and could possibly lend itself to a communal association.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Keeps in everybody's culture, because the thing I learned as a kid living around all these different cultural children that I went to school with and that are my friends, like the Jewish girls, like they got 2 refrigerators. What do I know about 2 refrigerators? What did I learn from that? I can step into somebody's house and know when I see 2 refrigerators what I'm dealing with, what kind of people they are. And I'm not going to come with assumptions. I'm going to have already known about your culture, respect for your culture. And of course, you know what the greatest common denominator is? And I'm going to tell you what I do, and I suggest you do it in your town too with your kids. Go to everybody's goddamn parade and eat the food. And listen to the music. This is why we always go to the parade. Go to the parade, eat the food, mix them up. Go to the Irish parade. Go to the Puerto Rican parade. We got so many parades here in New York. Everybody has to have a moment. Everybody got to have Fifth Avenue, right?
Puerto Rican
everybody. Take your kids to cultural events, and the greatest common denominator is the food, because everybody loves to eat. And once you sit down with people from another culture and eat their food, your life will change forever.
No doubt, no doubt. So we're hearing we're hearing 3 recommendations, families. Parents of biracial kids, sit down at what I call the classroom of the home which is the dinner table, and talk candidly, fun, jokingly, pull out the photo albums, put grandma and granddaddy on FaceTime, and tell your beautiful, rich cultural histories to give your beautiful biracial a sense of connection. The other one is, as Abby's talking about, and I don't know if we're going to have as many as they represent down there in New York, but go to other cultural activities and events, parades, festivals, see how the people laugh, how they joy, how they tell their story, how they interact. They will likely embrace you with open arms. People always enjoy someone expressing appreciation for their culture. And then get your cuisine on, get your taste on, eat the food, realize the seasoning, the taste, and the food life of other kind of cultural communities. So those are three things, beautiful family. Magic Mullah, what would you add in terms of ways to sort of teach your beautiful children both identities? I don't know if you have children, but as a way of sort of, I would advocate that biracial kids ought to maintain a sense of communal orientation rather than just exclusively an individualistic orientation. What are your thoughts, Magic?
Right, because I had that experience of being like only in white, growing up only in white spaces and then only in black spaces, and I didn't like it because it's like we get singled out. I really do believe you should raise your children in diverse spaces where you are exposed to everybody's different culture and you're learning and you're eating the food. I think that is the best experience for biracial children, is growing up with diversity and growing up you're not gonna be the only little mixed kid in the black space or in the white space or whatever space. Like, you could be around, and so you could have that sense of community. You could build bonds not based on race alone. You could have like Abby's always saying that you got to have common interests and goals, and people who share a vision with you. Like, you could learn how to make friends of people of all different races based on what you have, not just on race alone, but based on what you have in common. So it can be a healthy bond and not like a trauma bond where it's like, there's trauma in our little biracial spaces. There's a lot of trauma bonding because we go through a lot,
Trauma
and
bond.
I think it's healthy. Yeah.
I hear, baby.
Sorry, I do have 3 children. Mommy!
Hey, she said, I want your time, Mom. No, it's okay if you need sensitive.
I wanted to piggyback off something she said that we did bring up earlier, and that is the common interest. And I'll bring a great analogy to this that most men will understand. You can walk into any bar; it's a mixed crowd, and it's all the men are cheering on one team. You're toasting the guys you don't even know. Everybody, right. There it is. There it is. All of a sudden, it's not about how much money you got. It's not about your color. It's about that common thing. And when you start focusing on that common thing, there you are in a place of networking. Yeah. There's where you can have conversation. You'll find out, even when you go to these cultural events I'm telling you about, how much each one of these cultural people are just like your people. Yep. They're loud, they drink. They're the people, some people don't want them around. They gossip. They got the window lady, the nosy window lady. I mean, just every neighborhood. We have so many different types of neighborhoods here in New York where everybody in the world has their 10-block radius in New York City. The Russians are here. Everybody's here. Everybody's here. There's nobody in this world that cannot come to New York and find their tribe. Right. When you go from neighborhood to neighborhood, you may see a little different things where everybody has their own cultural thing and the language may change on the awning, on the sign, but somebody's playing their music loud, somebody's hanging around drunk, somebody's doing, it's the same vibe. And you start to realize there's so much more in common than different. And then all those things start to come down. And that's the thing you need to teach your kids, because you can make them very one-way identified and out of fear. You may make them more black identified and say, we need to have this black talk. My son, my this. Absolutely. But when they get out there in the world, depending on their common interests, what they gravitate to, their friends. And remember, me and you at our age, we didn't have this machine. And this machine is going to take your children places they may never physically get in their life and meet people they may never be able to touch. Right. But they can have so many connections, whether it be educational, financial. So you don't want to start instilling those people are evil throughout history when so much has changed and so many minds have changed and the generations are changing and their mindset is not the same. Yeah. So we owe it to them to allow them to kind of, we can let them know the history of what happened, but really allow them to breathe and think better for themselves for the future. You know, they do deserve better, and they will have better.
Yeah, Abby, you're speaking mad science right there.
Yes, I love it.
What you're actually speaking is an element of diversity education, right? If there's been historical tension between two groups, you can't start with the obvious, the dissonance of the two groups facing each other. You want to find other commonalities that they can sort of drop down the tension and begin to build a sense of camaraderie, collegiality, commonality around that which they share in common. So similarly, you talked about the bar, you're cheering for a common team, and all of a sudden that's joyful and you're getting to know each other. What's your name? Where you from? How many kids you got, right? And you're not addressing, the historical racial rigidity that might be there had you approached it otherwise. The other thing is when you can engage another person's culture, particularly around high celebration and laughter, just as you talked about, Abby, you get to know them at a human level. And then you will discover one of the greatest lessons of life, that all people laugh, all people have fear, sorrow, anxiety, they have insecurities, they have moments of overinflated arrogance, they have death stories, they have rituals, they have courtship kind of stories. And once you realize that they have that just like you then can transcend any rigid cultural conflict, and you can assign them the greatest assignment you can make, which is their humanity, that they are a human just like yourself. Culture teaches these lessons, but it is a way of getting to an elevated understanding of humanity.
I have a quick analogy about human beings. We all think there's something outside of ourselves in the universe that's going to come down and talk to us one day and be like, hey, trust me, the day that the white guy that hates the black guy are in there fighting and this alien comes down, they're going to be running to each other. Trust me. They're going to be like, at least I know what you're made of. I don't know.
Right? The aliens. Yeah, let me say,
it's a human thing, right? Because if some wild animals were chasing us and we were all, let's say we were all in some kind of thing with each other, and the wild animals chasing us, and we're at the white campsite is over there and the black campsite is over there and the bears start attacking, everybody's in it together now, okay? So I think for some point in time, it's the most common denominator that's going to make you wake up and see it's time to kind of chill. And I think what's the most hurtful at times, and I think the most that a lot of this is coming from the Black community, and that's what I think is hurting. That's very hurtful sometimes, where it's almost like it's so close, it's hurting. And you may think that, oh well, we're not being, we'll go to the white community and see how they treat you. I think that there's something going on in the white community where I think they are kind of not wanting to get involved. There's already so much that they're trying to crawl out of, and so many of them are turning against even that mindset of looking for somebody to hate on. So there's been a lot of progression in that area where there's already a split, and they're like within each other. And even when I was a kid, remember the Berlin Wall or whatever that wall was? I never understood. I'm like, well, what's going on? Who are these people, right? And when the wall came down to this, white people on both sides, what's this about? If it wasn't a black and white thing, I didn't understand it. Now I'm wondering why I don't have. I actually, like I said, I enjoy my common interest friends where it crosses all those lines, and I found out a lot of white people are really not digging all of that racism either. That their parents, they don't want to get involved in that. They're doing business together with people. They love music. They love food. They have friends. Look at all my mother's old jazz musician friends, white, black, green, purple. I don't know, all these old people. And I'm like, I look at them. They were fine, but I'm a kid of the 60s. I'm a product of the hippie era. So they had already started kind of pulling away from anything to do with it. And in the rebellion, whatever common thing they had is what they fell in love with. And then everything else fell out. And then as kids, it's like, my grandparents loved us. They were like, come sit on the porch. And they used to love to like make us sit on the front porch and say hi to everybody to walk by. Hey, come over here, meet my grandchildren. I'm like, oh my God. They would go out of their way to throw it in people's faces because they already felt like outsiders.
No,
So,
no, you've had a hell of a lot.
I love it.
Separate history knowledge.
Abby, let me
say one more thing before I go. I gotta go. I gotta take care of these kids, okay? So I just want to say my favorite thing about being biracial is, you get to form genuine connections with people. Because like I said, I didn't grow up in like with the environment of like that community of like it's only people like me around me. You know what I'm saying? So it's like I had to find out what I had in common with people and form relationships and connections through that. And it's really awesome. I think it's a great, awesome thing to be able to form connections, not just based on superficial things, but based on like genuine, real foundations and being able, I love that about being biracial, and I encourage that in others, like forming those genuine connections with no matter who people's background they are, no matter what skin color or race they come from, you know how to form those genuine connections out of love for
Yeah,
another human being, right? So yeah, that's my
beautiful.
favorite thing about being biracial. Thank you guys. It was a great conversation. I gotta go take care of these children. So
Thank you
love
very
I
y'all.
much.
love you today. It's always
Bye.
magic. It's always
Go to a
magic.
parade. Go
Bye.
to a parade. Go to a parade, man. Abby,
Yeah. I want
any
you to encourage your. Yeah, I'm gonna say goodbye to him soon, but I want you to encourage your children to really embrace that special sauce that is that mix. Don't make them pick a side. Don't make them choose to hate or dislike or be so guarded against people throughout history because of history.
Mhm.
Let them know how special they are and celebrate it and wave their own flag. This is why, because at some point in time it's easy for us to get absorbed and just sort of absorbed into whomever we think we feel most comfortable with.
Right.
But if we never learn what's going on the other side, we're going to make assumptions about people that may want to love us too, and that goes on both sides. You understand? So don't make assumptions about these people and don't make assumptions about those people, and learn to love both. First of all, start with your family, the closest, not the closet, the closest to you, your family. Your family
Mhm.
at some point in time is going to have to get together and love you. And regardless of whatever racial things they may have, at the end of the day, they know your family, your blood. All of that will melt away with time. That's a
Mhm.
learned condition like anything else that kind of melts away. So start with the family conversation. Start with the family gathering. Start with learning the history. Pull out the old photo albums. You have the right idea. Sure.
Yep. No, Abby, those are wonderful parting words from you. Love your family. Start with the human beings in front of you. Discover their story, their narrative, which essentially is your story. And as you learn about the robustness of a people, naturally you'll start with the good, the positive. But when your family gets really down to it, you'll explore and express the joy of the family, the successes, darker moments, complexity, and contradictions. And in doing that, you give yourself a certain kind of human permission that you can understand through your family, and then you can translate that and juxtapose that upon other cultures and communities. So if you are a child, a biracial child of interracial parents, definitely embrace both of them. Be mindful of an individualistic mindset and times where and how that might be appropriate, but also lean into the communal self. There's great joy in feeling membership with two or more races that make up who you are, representing the beautiful love source. Abby, thank you so much for joining me.
Wait a minute. My pleasure, and I wish you well and your channel well. And I'm happy. I'm really happy to have met you today, and I thank you very much for having me on your panel.
Thank you, Abby. Truly appreciate it as well. All right, beautiful family. We are at 48 minutes. I don't want to exceed an hour, but I do, I'm enjoying this space. I'm learning a lot. Again, my pathway was into a blackness that gave me solid identity, and it's exciting and it's amazing, and I'm just sort of taken aback by how things are unfolding in a modern era. But if I really thought about it, I shouldn't be surprised. Trajectory growth, number of biracial kids, technological opportunities to communicate, and then also this sort of banter that's going on in person in some instances, and also through technology, where young folks are kind of struggling, with each other in terms of who is what and who is not what, right? But after all the noise and the fury, right, what lands down to me is a common, obvious, logical kind of thing that a child ought to love both their love sources equally in private and in public. To me, that makes significant sense. That is actually an appropriate thing to do, to not only have a genuine demonstration of love for mama, a genuine demonstration of love for father, but also a genuine demonstration of love for all that they represent as well on both family trees. So beautiful folks, again, let me say thank you. Thank you for, there's been a lot of attention on the page recently. I truly appreciate it. Keep coming in the comments. Let me see what's on your mind, what's in your spirit. And if you think there's something topically that you'd like to address, feel free to send me um, an email or throw it in the comment. Would love to hear what's on your spirit and what's on your mind. That's what I wanted to share. Please take a look at the next video. It's one of these boxes right here. And if you like what you're seeing, give us a subscribe. Tell some folks about it. We're a parent-oriented kind of channel. We'll do some things in the musing space, the biographical space, the philosophical space on occasion, but I'll always try to anchor it in parent strategies. Too many children are born to single-parent homes, y'all. Too many cultural children are born to single-parent homes. And so when we birth them, we got to birth them out of preparation and not passion. And then when we birth them, we got to raise them with high intentionality. Thank you guys so much for joining us. Check out one of these videos. On behalf of J4 Conversations, love, love, love.